Buenas tardes. Well, I'm glad to see that the room didn't completely clear out since I am the last speaker. And I just want to begin by thanking LULAC National President Margaret Moran, Brett Wilkes, and of course the board of LULAC. It is really an honor to be here and to actually present to you at this 83rd annual LULAC Convention and Expo. I am honored and I am humbled. And I'm so used to speaking to a jury of 12 and not a room full of people. But I try to imagine that it's pretty much the same. You're just normal, everyday people like jurors, and you will listen to the short remarks that I have today. I'm excited to speak to you today about the tremendous contributions that women have made to our society, in particular Latino women. And I also would like to take this opportunity to share some personal experiences that I've had as a federal prosecutor in the civil rights arena. Now, you're all probably wondering, what is this trial attorney from DC doing here and speaking amongst such amazing and inspiring women? You know what? I'm wondering the same thing. As I was thinking about and preparing my remarks for the luncheon today, there were so many women that came to mind, so many inspiring women, so many women that have come before me, who have paved the way for me and for all of us, and who have shattered the glass ceiling. There were just too many. Like any good lawyer, I started to write out names and a list of those amazing women, and it was just too long. There were names like our own current president, Margaret Moran of LULAC, and Dr. Jill Biden, and also the speaker we just heard from, U.S. Secretary of Labor, Hilda Solis. There were also women like Rosa Parks, and she was known as the First Lady of Civil Rights. She was a civil rights heroine. She was a seamstress who in 1955 got on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama after finishing her work and boarded that bus and refused to give up her seat to a white man who had boarded the bus, and all the white seats were filled. People like Rosa Parks truly paved the way for others, like our first Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor. We pave the way for each other, and that is a responsibility that we all have. There are other women that were on my list. There was Celia Cruz, there was Shakira, there was so many others. And then I got the opportunity to see the video of Irma Martinez presented by the Orgullosa group, and there is another Latina for you. And what I realized when I was making my list was that all these women had a common thread. These women were women of substance. They were women of character. And they were women who simply did not believe in giving up. It just was not an option. They were women from different walks of life, different backgrounds, with different levels of education, but women who understood all too well that passion and education was the key to success, and that nothing was impossible. So after spending a good amount of time writing notes, tearing them up, throwing them in the trash can, I decided that I would speak to you today about someone who most of you do not know and may never get a chance to know. But I'm confident that when I share my story with you, it will resonate with you, and you will remember your own story. The story starts on December 21st, 1962. A 32-year-old single woman from Medellin, Colombia, arrived in New York City with her best friend Olga and a suitcase full of spring-like clothing that was completely inappropriate for the time of the year. Connie, as she liked to be known, and her friend Olga came to America for different reasons. Connie's mother had just died, and her brothers, she was one of 13, were trying to impose their will on her. They were trying to tell her who to marry, what to wear, and what to eat, practically. She would have none of that. Olga came to the US with Connie because she basically came along for the ride, and she got the money from Connie. Connie and Olga arrived in Manhattan, and it was a snowy day. They began their life in their new country. The cold was unbearable. They had never seen snow before or experienced the kind of weather that they were in for. Jobs were abundant. In fact, they were giving out green cards like it was going out of style. A little different than the way things are today. Connie started working at a factory in Manhattan that manufactured drinking straws. Connie had no idea what she was doing in her new job. She had been a bookkeeper in Colombia. And like an episode out of I Love Lucy, the straws were flying everywhere, and she was out of a job. But that didn't stop her. The next day, she worked somewhere else, folding tablecloths. She lost that job too, but she persisted. Within 4 months of arriving in the US, she met and married a man named Ignacio, a Colombian man who believed that the word impossible was only used by those who did not know how to dream. There were other jobs and other pink slips for Consuelo. And they had 3 young girls and eventually settled in Queens, New York, where she still lives. In 1979, when Connie was just 47 years old, Ignacio was kidnapped while on a business trip in Colombia. His body was never found. Their oldest daughter had just celebrated her quinceañera, and her 2 younger sisters, aged 14 and 12, were now without a father. Confronted with the reality of being a single mother in a foreign land with no real family to support her, she got up the next day and she went to work. Connie worked at Mount Sinai Hospital as a clerk bookkeeper and earned about $300 a week. She knew that the only future she could offer her daughters was education, and she would do whatever it took to make sure that they got it. At times, the girls thought their mother was not really cool and didn't really understand what it meant to be an American. Later, those same girls would realize that, in fact, she knew all too well what it meant to be an American and a Colombian American. At night, Connie would quietly cry herself to sleep, believing that the girls didn't hear her cry. By day, she held everyone together, and she spent time not only with each one of her daughters and inspiring and empowering them to be better every day, but to never forget where she had come from, what she had gone through, and to never, ever forget the people around you and the people in your community. Somehow or other, at some crazy hour of the night, Connie decided that she would make a difference in her community. And she, along with some other women, and I think there was one man, decided that they were going to form an organization called Corazón a Corazón, which means heart to heart. And it was a small organization because they had heard that there was a child in Colombia that needed a heart transplant, had no money, had no insurance, had no way of getting that heart transplant, and without it, he would die. So they decided amongst themselves that they were going to make it happen, and that is how Corazón a Corazón was founded. Eventually, the boy came to the US. He was treated for free by doctors in New York, and he now lives in Pereira, and he is a fine, upstanding young man, according to Connie. I'm happy to report to you that all 3 of Connie's girls became profesionales, which is, of course, what we all parents strive to give their children. And I share a little of Connie's life with you as an example of what it means to persevere, to take chance, to risk, and to never, ever give up. Connie is an 81-year-old woman and is still going strong. She lives in the same apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens, where she raised her 3 girls, and is truly an exceptional and outstanding role model for me. Es mi mamá. Thank you. I am so honored to be here today that I couldn't sleep last night. I was up at 4 in the morning, and I was so happy about sharing this particular story, but I didn't want to make it boring or long or irrelevant. And most of all, I wanted to inspire and motivate 3 very important people that are with me today. And they are my son, Nicholas, who's 4, and they're sitting at table 41. My niece, Sarah, who's 13 and is here from Italy, and who is Abuelita's favorite and only granddaughter, and my husband, Juan. Thank you. And of course, Juan is my mom's favorite son-in-law. You all know that, right? Now, I'm here today because of my mother, and I am a civil rights prosecutor because of the empowerment, the push, the encouragement, the cantaleta that my mother said day in and day out. And because of that, I want to tell you just a little bit about what drives me, my passion, and that is prosecuting civil rights crimes all over the country. I specialize in crimes where the victims are generally the most vulnerable. Some of the victims are undocumented, and others are targeted because of the color of their skin or their sexual preference, or simply because some law enforcement officer decided that he was going to use his badge as a weapon. I prosecute human trafficking cases, hate crimes, and police brutality cases nationwide, and I've been doing this since 1999. I see the best and the worst in people, and I see hope and kindness in every single case I prosecute. And I feel I make a difference, even in the smallest way, with every case I bring. I would like to tell you about one case in particular that was one of my first cases, but stays with me every single day. This case occurred in Big Springs, Missouri, in the Lake region of Missouri, in the Ozarks. A Mexican-American family was camping out by the river. The mother was 8 months pregnant. Her husband was with her, as well as her in-law. There were also 4 young boys who were along for the trip. They were the children of the pregnant woman and the father. And they were enjoying a wonderful day by the river. They were fishing, they were camping, they were, eating. They were having a really good time. And just as dusk began to fall, 3 white skinheads decided that they did not like Mexicans in their river. They arrived and they targeted this family because they were in their territory, using their river, and because they were Mexican. They viciously attacked this family. They yelled racial slurs at all of them, and they threatened to chop them up, kill them, and throw them in the river. Now, the boys ranged in age from 8 to 12. They were young kids. All 7 members of the family, including the 4 boys, attempted to escape in a very tiny Honda Civic. The mother, who I mentioned was 8 months pregnant, was desperately trying to get out of the river area. She begged to be left alone. She cried. They broke windows. They jumped on the car. They kicked in the windshield. And somehow or other, she was able to maneuver that car out of there, those 7 people in the car. And because of the hero that she is, they lived. She went into false labor, but the baby eventually was born and is striving. He's a wonderful kid. And the boys who were in the back were all cut up because of the glass that had shattered the rear window as well. Thankfully, as I said, they were able to escape and they were apprehended. I prosecuted these racists. You know, being from New York, you're kind of used to, if somebody doesn't like you, they're just gonna tell you. They're not gonna attack you. They're not gonna do all these crazy things that, unfortunately, I have seen in some of my cases. At sentencing for that particular case, one of the young boys, I think he was not the youngest, but the 8-year-olds perhaps, or the 10-year-old. And all victims have the right to speak at sentencing. Most of them choose not to, but it really does make an impact on the sentence, I think, that the judge eventually imposes. So one of the young boys in the family wrote a letter, and he wrote the letter to the judge to tell him about his experience and how this had truly affected his life. He was too afraid to come into the courtroom, even though I explained to him, don't worry, there'll be US Marshals there, the judge will be there, I'll be there with you. No, I couldn't convince him, and I tried. And his name is David Uvida. And David Uvida wrote this letter, and I kid you not, there was not a dry eye in that courtroom when I finished reading that letter. I honestly don't know how I got through it. A US Marshal who was, I would say, a good 300 pounds of muscle was crying. At the end of the sentencing, that marshal came up to me and said, Ms. Vieco, would you please give my hat to David? I want him to have it. And so along with the hat, I bought him a fishing pole and I gave it to him. And I said, you know what, David? Not everybody is like those guys. And you're very lucky that you were raised by the mother that you have and the father that you have. Now go out there and make a difference. He is making a difference. Ladies and gentlemen, the case I just told you about didn't happen 30 years ago. It happened in 1999. The case Attorney General Eric Holder, my boss, mentioned yesterday to you during his speech happened more recently. What that shows is that as much as we think things have changed, there's still so much more work to do. And we each have to take responsibility and do that and be part of that. The fight for civil rights continues, and I hope that by the time my son Nicholas and my niece Sarah are adults, that things will be different, that they will be better. Remember, nothing is impossible. That's a word that's used by people who don't know how to dream. Thank you.